Tyler tried to leave the room, actually stood up and started walking toward the door, like he could just exit this the way he exited every hard conversation in his life. Two board members blocked the doorway, not physically aggressive, just quietly standing there. The same way, ironically, those security guards had once stood in front of me. "Sit down, Tyler," Patterson said, not even raising his voice. "This isn't over. It's just starting." Diane looked at me across that table, and for the first time in my entire life, I watched her searching for a script and finding absolutely nothing. "Sarah, please." "We're family." "You forged my signature," I said quietly. "You let them walk me out in handcuffs in front of people I trained. You let your son steal money and blame me for it while I couldn't afford groceries. You don't get to say the word family right now." I didn't yell it. I didn't need to. The silence in that room said everything my anger wanted to. Elaine Ford, the board member who'd been reviewing the bank records, finally set the papers down and looked directly at Diane. "Diane, I've sat across from you in budget meetings for 6 years. You told this board repeatedly that Sarah's division needed tighter oversight. You used that narrative to justify cutting her team's resources for 2 straight fiscal years. Meanwhile, your son was draining company funds into a luxury lease. Do you have anything to say to that, or are we simply going to keep hearing the word family?" Diane's mouth opened, then closed. For a woman who had spent 5 years perfecting the art of sounding certain, she suddenly had absolutely nothing rehearsed for this moment. "I want to see a lawyer," she finally said, quietly, all the ice gone from her voice. "That seems like a very good idea," Patterson replied. Not unkindly, just tired, the way you sound when you've watched someone you respected turn into someone you don't recognize. Tyler, still standing near the door, finally spoke, his voice cracking in a way that almost made me feel something close to sympathy. "Mom, you told me this was fine. You told me nobody would ever look." Diane didn't even turn to look at him. "And that, more than anything else in that entire meeting, told me everything I needed to know about how far loyalty in that family actually went once the cost of loyalty became real." The weeks that followed moved fast, faster than I expected justice ever could. The state attorney general's office opened a formal fraud investigation into both the forged proxy documents and the embezzled funds. Tyler was charged with wire fraud and forgery-adjacent financial crimes tied to the Shell LLC. Diane, while not directly charged for the embezzlement, was named in a civil suit for the forged shareholder agreement and ultimately settled by returning full voting control of my father's original shares, plus damages, rather than risk a public trial that would have dragged her name through court records for years. She resigned from the board entirely rather than face a formal vote to remove her. Tyler's case is still moving through the courts as I record this, but forensic accounting doesn't really leave a lot of wiggle room, and his lawyer has reportedly already brought up plea deal conversations. My wrongful termination and defamation suit against the company settled quietly, with a public statement clearing my name, published internally to every single employee who watched me get walked out that day. Marcus from accounting sent me a message that just said, "I'm sorry I didn't say anything, I should have." Priya cried on the phone with me for 20 minutes, I forgave them. Fear does strange things to good people, and I understand that better now than I ever did before. 6 weeks after that board meeting, I stood in the same lobby where they'd once walked me out in handcuffs. Except this time I was walking in. The board, led by Mr. Patterson, had spent that time reviewing my father's original shares, my performance record, and frankly, the sheer mess Diane and Tyler had left behind operationally. They didn't just restore my ownership stake. They offered me the position of Chief Executive Officer. When the announcement went out to the company, the subject line just said, "Introducing our new CEO, Sarah Mitchell." I stood at the front of that same conference room, the one where I'd once sat frozen while my aunt tried to destroy my life. And I looked out at faces that used to look away from me in the hallway. "I know some of you watched me get escorted out of this building a few months ago," I said. "And I know some of you didn't say anything because you were scared, and I understand that. I'm not here to punish anyone for staying quiet. I'm here to build something my grandfather would be proud of, and something my father never got the chance to finish." The applause wasn't loud and dramatic like in a movie. It was quiet, steady, real, which honestly felt so much better. That first week as CEO, I did something small that mattered more to me than any title on a door. I walked down to the West Coast logistics floor, the same floor I used to run, and I personally handed Priya a promotion to team lead, the one she'd been quietly passed over for twice while I was gone. "You didn't have to do that," she told me, eyes glassy. "I know," I wanted to. I also sat down with Marcus from accounting, the same Marcus who couldn't look at me the day I was walked out. He came to my office on his own, nervous, holding a folder like it was a peace offering. I found some discrepancies in an old expense report from 2 years ago, he said. Back when you were still running West Coast, I should have flagged it back then. I think it might have been an early version of what Tyler was doing. I was scared to say anything because Diane signed off on it. I thanked him. I didn't punish him for staying quiet back then. Fear is not the same thing as guilt. And I decided early on that the culture I wanted to build wouldn't run on fear the way the last 5 years clearly had. I also made one policy change my very first month, something so simple, it almost embarrassed me that it hadn't existed before. Any financial disciplinary action against an employee now required a second, independent signature from someone outside that employee's direct reporting chain, plus a mandatory 48-hour window before any termination could be finalized. I called it, only half joking, the Sarah Clause. Nobody else was ever going to be walked out the door in handcuffs based on one person's word alone. Not on my watch. People ask me sometimes if I hate my aunt, if I hate Tyler. Honestly, I don't have room for hate anymore. It takes up too much space, and I spent 5 years unknowingly giving them rent-free access to my future. I'm done doing that. I saw Diane once more, months later, at a mediation meeting related to the civil settlement. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, just smaller in the way people do when the armor they've worn their whole life finally gets taken away in front of witnesses. She didn't apologize. I don't think she knows how. But she also didn't try to justify it anymore. And honestly, that quiet absence of a script felt like the closest thing to an admission I was ever going to get, so I let it be enough. My mother and I are slowly rebuilding things too. It took her a long time to understand that just apologize and see if she'd drop it was never advice rooted in love. It was advice rooted in fear of conflict, and once the forged documents became public record, she couldn't unsee what she'd almost asked me to swallow. She cried on the phone when the settlement was announced and told me she was sorry for doubting me even for a second. I believe her. People are allowed to learn late, as long as they actually learn. What I feel now is something closer to peace, the kind that only comes after you've watched the truth do exactly what it always eventually does when you're patient enough to let it. My dad used to tell me the truth doesn't need volume, it just needs time. He was right. It just needed someone patient enough and hurt enough and stubborn enough to give it that time. If you're still here with me at the end of this story, thank you for sitting through it with me. If someone in your life ever tried to make you disappear so they could take what was never theirs, I hope this reminded you that quiet, patient, legal justice can hit so much harder than anything loud ever could. Stay patient, stay smart, and never, ever let someone convince you that staying silent is the same thing as staying safe. The turning point came from the most unexpected place. A woman named Rachel Okafor, a corporate litigation attorney I'd met years earlier at a logistics conference, reached out after seeing a mutual friend's post about my situation. I heard what happened, she said over coffee. The first real meal I'd had in days that someone else paid for. I don't believe a word of it. Nobody does anymore, I said. That's not true. I do. And if even a fraction of what you're telling me is real, Sarah, this isn't just wrongful termination. This could be fraud, forgery, and shareholder theft. That's not a rumor mill problem. That's a courtroom problem. I showed her the documents from the storage unit. She went quiet for a long time, flipping through the pages. This signature, she said, pointing at the proxy agreement. Do you have anything with your real signature from around that time? Bank documents, tax forms, anything? I did. My father's estate paperwork, which I'd signed myself, dated 4 days before this forged one. She laid them side by side. Sarah, these aren't even close. Whoever forged this didn't even try that hard, which tells me something important. What? It tells me nobody was ever supposed to compare them. Which means nobody ever checked. Which means this has been sitting quietly for 5 years, waiting for someone to actually look. That night, I didn't sleep, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't because I was falling apart. It was because my brain was finally working again. Here's what most people don't understand about a smart, legal takedown. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. At least not at first. It's quiet, methodical, and it requires you to be more patient than the person who wronged you. So here's exactly what I did, step by step, and I want you to really sit with this part, because this is the blueprint. Step 1. I hired a forensic accountant, David Chun, who specialized in corporate fraud. Rachel knew him from a prior case. He agreed to review everything for a reduced rate once I explained the situation. And honestly, once he saw the forged signature, he was hooked. The same way you get hooked on a true crime documentary. Step 2. I filed a formal records request. As a former employee and shareholder, even a supposedly diluted one, I was legally entitled to request corporate financial records from a specific window of time. Diane didn't know that request had been filed under a completely different name, through Rachel's firm, so it wouldn't tip her off. Step 3. David found it. The actual $400,000 theft I'd been accused of wasn't stolen at all. It had been rerouted in 3 separate transfers into a vendor account that, when we traced the ownership, led to a Shell LLC registered under Tyler Whitfield's name. My cousin, the golden boy sipping oat milk lattes while I got walked out in handcuffs. He hadn't just watched me get framed. He was the actual thief. Step 4. Rachel quietly reached out to 2 board members she'd worked with in prior cases. Board members who, it turned out, had been growing uneasy about Diane's leadership for over a year, especially after 2 major contracts fell through under Tyler's direction. Step 5, and this is the part that made my hands shake while I did it. We filed a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding the forged shareholder documents, along with a parallel civil claim for defamation and wrongful termination. This wasn't revenge built on anger. This was revenge built on paperwork. And paperwork, when it's real, doesn't care how good your smile is in a board meeting. There was a night about 3 weeks into this process where David called me at nearly 11 at night, and I could hear the excitement in his voice before he even finished his sentence. "Sarah, I need you to sit down for this." I'm sitting. The Shell LLC, Whitfield Logistics Consulting. It's not just receiving those 3 transfers. It's been active for almost 2 years. Smaller amounts spread out, dressed up as consulting fees for vendor negotiations that, as far as I can tell, never actually happened. How much total? Just under $1.1 million. I had to set my coffee down before I dropped it. He's been doing this for 2 years? At least. And Sarah, here's the part that's going to make you furious. Some of these consulting fee months line up exactly with quarters where your division's budget got quietly trimmed. Diane kept telling finance the company needed to tighten spending. She wasn't tightening spending. She was funneling it sideways into her son's pocket and using budget cuts to your team as cover. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. All those months I fought for headcount, fought for a bigger marketing budget for the Pacific Northwest renewal, and got told, gently, apologetically, that the company just didn't have the room right now. The room existed. It was just being spent on Tyler's rent, apparently, because we later found records showing a chunk of that money traced straight to a luxury apartment lease in River North. Rachel was equally thorough on the legal side. She spent hours combing through Illinois corporate law with me sitting across from her at her kitchen table, both of us drinking too much coffee, going through statute after statute about shareholder rights, proxy fraud, and the specific evidentiary standard needed to prove a forged signature in civil court. The good news, she told me one night, is that forged signature cases are actually easier to prove than people think. If you have a genuine comparison sample from the same time period. The bad news is Diane has had 5 years to get comfortable. She's not going to see this coming, which honestly works entirely in our favor. We also spent time quietly, talking to 2 former employees who'd left the company under strange circumstances around the same time as the forged proxy agreement. One of them, a former executive assistant named Carol Vance, remembered something that made my stomach turn. I remember being asked to notarize a stack of documents that week. Carol told us over the phone, her voice hesitant, careful. I was told it was routine estate paperwork. I didn't read every page. I was 23, Sarah, and grieving right alongside everyone else because your dad was kind to me. I had no reason to think Diane would lie to my face. Carol agreed to give a formal statement. It wasn't required, but it mattered because it meant this wasn't just documents anymore. It was a human being confirming exactly how the forgery had been executed, and exactly how confident Diane had been that nobody would ask a single follow-up question. While all of this was happening quietly behind the scenes, Diane had no idea. She was busy doing something else entirely. She was busy pushing the board to formally promote Tyler to Chief Operating Officer. Her reasoning, and I heard this secondhand from one of the sympathetic board members, was that with the Sarah situation resolved, the company needed strong, loyal family leadership to move forward. Strong, loyal family leadership. From the man who stole $400,000 and let his cousin take the fall for it. The board scheduled a formal vote for Tyler's promotion. Diane wanted it announced publicly, a big deal, press release, the whole thing. Partly because I think some small paranoid part of her wanted to bury the theft story under a positive headline before anyone asked more questions. She had no idea that Rachel and I, along with two board allies, had quietly requested that same board meeting be expanded into a full financial review session. She thought she was walking into a coronation. She was actually walking into an audit. The morning of the board meeting, I put on the navy blue blazer I used to wear to client pitches. The one that still smelled faintly like the office because I never got a chance to properly move out my things. Rachel met me outside the building. "You don't have to go in there," she said. "We can present the findings without you present if it's too much." "No," I said. "I need to watch this happen." "Are you sure?" "Rachel, I sat in a storage unit finding out my own aunt erased my father from history. I think I can handle a board meeting." We walked in together. Diane's face, when she saw me, went through about 4 emotions in under 2 seconds. Shock, then confusion, then something that almost looked like fear, before she forced it back into that same tight, superior smile. "Sarah, I didn't realize you'd be joining us." "I was invited," I said, "by the board." Tyler, sitting at the head of the table like he already owned it, barely glanced up from his phone. The chairman, Mr. Patterson, an older man who'd known my grandfather personally, cleared his throat. "Before we move to the agenda item regarding Mr. Whitfield's promotion, the board has requested a financial review be presented. Miss Okafor, if you would." Rachel stood, calm, composed, and completely devastating in the way only a good lawyer with airtight evidence can be. 6 weeks ago, Sarah Mitchell was terminated from this company and publicly escorted out on allegations of stealing $400,000 from vendor contract accounts. "We're aware," Diane snapped. "That matter is closed." "It's not closed," Rachel said. "It's just beginning. Because that $400,000 was never stolen by Sarah. It was rooted in 3 transfers into an LLC called Whitfield Logistics Consulting, registered to Tyler Whitfield at his personal residence." The room went completely silent. Tyler's face drained of color so fast I actually felt something close to pity. Almost. "That's absurd," Diane said, but her voice cracked slightly on the second word, just slightly, just enough. "It's documented," David Chen said, sliding printed bank records across the table. "Wire transfer confirmations, dates matching exactly with the falsified expense reports used to accuse Sarah." One of the board members, a woman named Elaine Ford, picked up the documents, scanning them with narrowing eyes. "There's more," Rachel continued. 5 years ago, following the passing of Robert Mitchell, a shareholder proxy agreement was signed, transferring voting control of Robert's shares to Diane Whitfield. That signature, purportedly Sarah Mitchell's, does not match any verified signature of hers from before or after that date. She placed the forged document next to the real one. Even from across the table, you could see it. The difference was glaring once you knew to look. "This is a forged legal document," Rachel said, "used to seize controlling interest in this company under false pretenses. Combined with the fraudulent theft allegations against Sarah and the actual embezzlement committed by Tyler Whitfield. This board is currently looking at a pattern of fraud spanning half a decade." Diane stood up so fast, her chair nearly tipped backward. "This is a coordinated attack. She's trying to destroy this family because she couldn't handle not being handed everything." "Diane," I said, finally speaking, my voice steadier than I expected it to be, "I didn't forge anything. I didn't steal anything. I built my entire career inside a company that you'd already stolen half of before I ever earned a single promotion. I'm not attacking the family. I'm just finally telling the truth the family never let me hear." Mr. Patterson, quiet until now, folded his hands on the table. "Diane Tyler, I've known this company since before either of you were born. I watched Harold build it with nothing. And I will not sit here and watch it get hollowed out by 2 people who thought loyalty meant looking the other way." He turned to the rest of the board. "I'm calling for an immediate suspension of Tyler Whitfield's promotion vote, pending full investigation. And I'm calling for Diane Whitfield's removal from her operational role effective today, pending the results of the state's forgery investigation." The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Every hand except Diane's own went up. They walked me out of my own family's company in handcuffs. In front of 40 employees. In front of the interns I trained. In front of the security guard who used to save me a parking spot. My aunt stood by the elevator, arms crossed, watching me like she'd just taken out the trash. She smiled. She actually smiled. What she didn't know was that in 6 weeks, that same board of directors would stand in that same lobby and introduce their new CEO. And it wasn't going to be her son. If you're new here, welcome. And if revenge stories where the villain builds their own coffin make your day a little better, hit subscribe right now because this one is going to feel so good by the end. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I was 29 years old. And 3 months ago, my own aunt framed me for stealing $400,000 from the company my grandfather built with his bare hands. Let me take you right into it. Sarah Mitchell, you need to come with us. 2 security guards. Not the friendly ones. The ones from corporate, the ones I'd never seen before. Excuse me? There's been a report filed. Financial discrepancies tied to your login credentials. We need you to gather your things. I laughed. I actually laughed because it sounded like a joke. There must be a mistake. I run the West Coast logistics accounts. I don't even have access to. Sarah, my aunt's voice cut through the office like a blade. Diane Whitfield, VP of Operations. My father's sister. The woman who used to braid my hair when I was 7. She was standing by her office door, coffee in hand, watching the whole thing unfold like it was a matinee she'd paid good money for. Diane, what is going on? I asked her directly. I think you know exactly what's going on, sweetheart. She said, sweetheart, the way you'd say it to someone you were about to destroy. I didn't take anything. I haven't touched the West Coast contracts budget in months, that you signed off on the reallocation yourself. That's not what the audit says. What audit? Nobody told me there was an audit. Because it's not your job to know. It's your job to answer for what you did. The guards took my badge first, then my laptop. Then, humiliatingly, they asked me to open my bag so they could check it. In front of everyone. Marcus from accounting wouldn't even look at me. Priya, who I'd mentored for 2 years, stared at her shoes, and Tyler, my cousin, Diane's son. The golden child who'd been coasting on a director title he didn't earn since the day he turned 25. He leaned against the wall, sipping an oat milk latte, watching me get walked out like it was the best entertainment he'd had all year. Tyler, I said, tell them. Tell them I had nothing to do with the vendor contracts. I didn't touch that account. He shrugged. Numbers don't lie, Sarah. Numbers don't lie. But people do. And I was about to learn just how far my own family was willing to lie to bury me. They didn't even let me grab my coat. It was October in Chicago, cold enough that I could see my breath by the time the revolving door spat me out onto the sidewalk with a cardboard box of desk plants and a stapler I apparently wasn't allowed to keep either. I stood there for a full minute just staring up at the building. Mitchell and Cole Logistics, in gold letters, my grandfather's name half of it, and I couldn't even go back inside to use the bathroom. My phone buzzed. A text from HR, automated cold. Your access badge has been deactivated. Please direct all further correspondence to legal. Legal? Not Diane, not even a human being, just legal. I called my mother from the sidewalk, hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone to my ear. Mom, they think I stole money. They walked me out in handcuffs. There was a pause on the line that lasted just a little too long. Sarah, honey, are you sure you didn't move something and forget to document it properly? That question broke something in me faster than the handcuffs did. Mom, I didn't steal $400,000. I don't even have the authority to move that kind of money without 3 signatures. I'm just asking. Diane sounded very sure on the phone. Of course she did. Diane always sounded sure. That was the most dangerous thing about her. She never once raised her voice. She just spoke in that calm, certain tone that made everyone else's doubts sound hysterical by comparison. Let me back up just for a second so you understand exactly what I lost that day. My grandfather, Harold Mitchell, built Mitchell and Cole Logistics from a single delivery truck in 1974. By the time he passed, it was a $200 million company with contracts across 11 states. My father, Robert Mitchell, was supposed to inherit half. Diane, his sister, the other half. But my father died 5 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, brutal, no warning. And somewhere in the grief and the funeral arrangements and the fog of losing my dad, papers got signed. Papers I was too devastated to read closely. Papers that quietly restructured ownership. I didn't know it then, but that was the first theft. Long before anyone accused me of stealing a single cent, someone had already stolen something much bigger. I just didn't know it yet. After my father passed, I stayed at the company because it felt like the only piece of him I had left. I worked my way up from an entry-level coordinator to running the entire West Coast logistics division in 4 years. I was good at my job. Really good. I brought in 3 new distribution contracts that added $11 million in annual revenue. And Diane hated every second of it. Because the better I did, the more people whispered that maybe Robert's daughter should have more say in the company. Maybe she should be on the board. Maybe one day she should run this thing. Diane could not let that happen. Not when she had Tyler to protect. Not when her own son had failed out of 2 other jobs and needed somewhere soft to land. So she built a trap. And she was patient about it. I remember a specific conversation, almost a year before all of this happened, at a company holiday party of all places. I just closed the Pacific Northwest distribution deal, the biggest contract the West Coast division had ever landed, and one of the senior directors, a little too much eggnog in him, raised a glass and said, "To Sarah, the future of this company." I saw Diane's face over the rim of her wine glass. She smiled, clapped along with everyone else, and then 20 minutes later, cornered me by the coat check. "You know," she said, swirling her wine, "your father would be very proud. He always did think this company was owed to him." Owed to him? Diane, he co-founded it with Grandpa. Co-founded, she repeated, like the word tasted bad. Interesting how history remembers things. I laughed it off at the time. I thought it was wine talking or old sibling jealousy, harmless. The kind every family carries around like an old scar nobody looks at anymore. I didn't know she was already sitting on a forged document that made sure history would remember it exactly the way she wanted. Tyler, meanwhile, had been quietly failing upward for years. He lost his first job at a marketing firm in Denver for what HR generously called communication issues. His second job at a friend's startup lasted 8 months before the company folded, conveniently right around the time Tyler was made a part owner. Then he landed at Mitchell & Cole as a special projects director, a title that, as far as I could ever tell, meant absolutely nothing measurable. Diane needed the company to need Tyler, and the company was never, ever going to need Tyler as long as I was standing there, doing his job better than he could without even trying. Now here's where it gets worse. Because what happened 3 weeks after they walked me out was not just embarrassing. It was the moment I realized exactly how deep this betrayal went. I was staying at my friend Jenna's apartment because I couldn't afford my rent anymore. Not with my accounts frozen pending the internal investigation, and not with every recruiter in the logistics industry suddenly not hiring the second they heard my last name attached to a theft allegation. I decided to go through my father's old storage unit. The one nobody had touched in 5 years. I told myself I was looking for comfort. Old photos, his handwriting, anything. What I found instead was a folder of documents from the week after he died. A revised shareholder agreement, signed 6 days after his funeral, with a signature that was supposed to be mine, on a line granting temporary voting proxy to Diane on behalf of the grieving family. A signature I never made because I was in a hotel room crying so hard I couldn't hold a pen, let alone sign away my father's legacy. It was forged. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my phone twice trying to take pictures of it. Diane hadn't just framed me for theft. 5 years earlier, she had forged my signature to steal my father's shares and quietly funnel controlling interest to herself. Everything I thought I'd earned, every promotion, every late night. She let me believe I was building a future in a company that, on paper, I barely owned anymore. The theft accusation wasn't about $400,000. It was about making sure I disappeared before anyone did the math and realized how much of that company should have been mine. I sat on the floor of that storage unit for almost an hour, not crying. Just sitting there, numb. Because it's one thing to be betrayed by someone. It's another thing to realize the betrayal started before you even knew there was a war going on. For 2 weeks after that, I hit a wall I didn't know existed inside me. I stopped answering calls. I stopped checking my email because it was just rejection after rejection. We've decided to move forward with other candidates. Over and over, the same sentence dressed up 11 different ways. My own mother, God love her, kept telling me to just apologize to Diane and see if she'd drop it. Apologize? For what? For existing. I remember standing in Jenna's kitchen at 2 in the morning, staring at a box of crackers because it was the only food in the pantry I could afford to eat that week, and thinking, this is what it feels like to be erased. Not killed. Not hurt, just erased. Written out of a story you spent your entire life helping to write. The theft allegation followed me everywhere, even after the company technically declined to press formal charges, which in the twisted logic of small industry circles somehow made it worse. No charges meant no trial, and no trial meant no chance for me to actually clear my name in public. It just sat there, a rumor with no expiration date, whispered in industry group chats and LinkedIn messages I was never meant to see. I applied for 11 jobs that first month. I heard back from 3. All 3 rescinded interest within a week, and one recruiter, more honest than the others, finally admitted it over the phone. Sarah, I'll be straight with you. Someone from Mitchell & Cole reached out directly to our hiring manager. Off the record, I probably shouldn't even be telling you this. What did they say? That there were ... concerns about integrity. Concerns about integrity. From the woman who forged my signature 5 years earlier. I stopped applying after that. Not because I gave up, but because I realized the fight wasn't going to be won by sending out more resumes into a hole Diane had already poisoned. My savings ran out faster than I expected. I sold my car, a 2-year-old Honda I'd been so proud of buying with my own bonus money just to cover 3 months of rent I already owed. I started skipping meals, not dramatically, just quietly. The kind of skipping where you tell yourself you're not that hungry, so you don't have to admit you're counting dollars in your head at the grocery store. Jenna never once made me feel like a burden, and I will be grateful to her for the rest of my life for that. But there's a specific kind of shame that comes from being 29 years old and sleeping on your friends' pull-out couch because your own family decided you were disposable. I thought about my dad a lot during those weeks. About how hard he worked. How he used to tell me, Sarah, the truth doesn't need volume, it just needs time. I didn't believe him back then. I was starting to believe him now because I had nothing left except time. And I decided I was going to use every single second of it.